Spending on the National Disability Insurance Scheme ran more slowly than the government forecast last financial year, but the number of people involved is climbing into the hundreds of thousands. The newly installed Social Services Minister Paul Fletcher has given an update on the NDIS to National Affairs correspondent Greg Jennett.
Well, Paul Fletcher, today marks something of a milestone for the Disability Insurance Scheme. What is that milestone?
Well, today we're announcing that some 200,000 Australians are now participating in the National Disability Insurance Scheme. That is a very significant milestone. The National Disability Insurance Scheme is the most comprehensive change to the way that Australians with a disability are supported that we've had for many, many decades. We're now fully operational in New South Wales, South Australia and the ACT. That's to say everybody new who comes in now goes on to the National Disability Insurance Scheme if they meet the eligibility criteria. We're working through it in the other states, and the estimate is that we'll be at about 460,000 by 2020. But that milestone of 200,000 on the participants in the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which is being announced today, is a very significant milestone. Look, this is a huge scheme. The rollout of it is complex. The National Disability Insurance Agency has taken on this task. It is a significant task, and there's a whole lot of things that have to happen.
Yeah, because quantity, if I can just interrupt you there, isn't necessarily an assurance of quality, is it? And we know that complaints were running pretty high in the last quarter of last year, just under 4,000. Are you satisfied about the care plans and the quality of the service being delivered?
Look, there's always more that can be done, and in a rollout of this scale, it's inevitable that issues will arise. What's important is that you have a system to identify them and respond to those issues. So, for example, we've set up an NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission, which is a complaints body, and it has significant powers to investigate and to impose penalties if we're not seeing the appropriate treatment of people with a disability. There's also a lot of work on what are called the pathways. That is the way that people with a disability engage with the National Disability Insurance Agency and its partners. Things like ensuring that everybody who wants to can have a face-to-face meeting with a planner to develop the plan that will then set out the kind of supports that they're going to get under the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
So your numbers are ticking up, but the actual spending is not. We note at the end of the last financial year, those figures came out yesterday, the budget was actually $2.5 billion under on NDIS spending. Why is that? What's that telling us?
Well, what that is telling us is that what you obviously do in setting a budget is you make some estimates about the number of people who will be in the scheme at a particular time and the amount of the payments that each of those people will be receiving. That's necessarily an estimate. Where we've got to is that we're tracking at slightly less than what had been estimated in terms of the numbers, but that'll wash out over time.
So it will pick up, will it? I mean, our global projections for the full rollout cost of NDIS, is there any reason to think it'll be less than what was originally forecast?
The estimates that we have had all the way along continue to be the estimates that we're working to. By about 2021-22, total spend is going to be well over $20 billion a year. This is a massive scheme, and what is important is that we are making sure we get the best value for money, that we're delivering the best outcomes for Australians with a disability. We also need to be aware of issues like fraud, and we are putting a lot of effort into making sure that there are mechanisms to detect and respond to fraud. We need to develop the markets within which services are provided, because it's a big change. Historically in the disability space, there's been the provision of block grants to providers, and then people with a disability weren't given much choice about what services they could get. We're now moving to a very different system under which Australians with disability who participate in the National Disability Insurance Scheme they're given a plan, and with that comes funding. They can then make their choice about which providers they go to. Yep. That's a very significant change, and naturally that takes time to work through and bed down.
All right, can I ask, elsewhere in your rather broad social services portfolio, Newstart and welfare payments, but particularly Newstart, again, that was underspent last financial year against projections by $6.3 billion. Wouldn't it suggest that if you underspending, there is capacity to move on an increase for Newstart, as has been called for by ACOS and Deloitte Access, etc.
Look, the key point is that the best form of welfare is a job. We've created over 1 million jobs since coming to government in 2013, and that includes people who have moved off of welfare into work. And everybody who moves off of welfare into work, that's terrific for them in terms of, first of all, their financial position, second of all, their self-esteem and a sense of contributing to the community. But thirdly, it's good news for our economy and our community.
So do you rule out an increase? I know those Deloitte Access figures said upfront cost $3 billion if you added $75 a week to the payment, but the net cost for a growing economy only about $1 billion. Do you rule it out?
I make the point that the great majority, in fact around 99% of people on Newstart are also receiving other benefits, be it Commonwealth rent assistance, be it the energy supplement. So it's important to understand the full picture. We certainly don't have plans to increase Newstart. I think the Prime Minister has spoken about that and made that clear. What we're focused on is supporting Australians who are presently depending upon welfare, people of working age, to move into the workforce. Over 200,000 people, the number of people on welfare is now more than 200,000 less than it was when we came to government. That is very significant. Our focus is on getting people into a job. The best form of welfare is a job. That is a real focus for us, and we're supporting that with policy initiatives like the cashless debit card. Yep. We've just got through Parliament the authorisation to roll that out in Bundaberg and Hervey Bay. That means that 80% of your benefit goes onto the card, which can be used to purchase the necessities of life, but it can't be used to purchase alcohol or drugs. And in part that is about helping people to get work ready, because if you've got a serious addiction issue, you're not able to engage in the workforce. So we want to do everything we can to support Australians on Newstart or on youth allowance to come into the workforce, get a job.
All right.
That is our focus.
All right, just finally, Paul Fletcher, speaking of jobs, one you previously performed was broadly related to the communications portfolio. There are, just finally, reports about interference, I think it would be described as, by the then Prime Minister against certain ABC reporters. Do you find that disturbing, improper, when it comes to the principle of editorial independence? Well,
there is a clear principle of editorial independence. There's a clear framework set out in the legislation under which the ABC operates, which establishes that independence. Look, I'll leave more detailed comments on that issue to the Communications Minister, but I would simply say there's a well-established framework which has been in place for many, many years.
All right, Paul Fletcher, we're out of time. Thanks so much for your availability this morning.
Thanks, Greg.